Hi, my name's Brittany, and on my 35th birthday in front of 70 guests, my mother-in-law handed me divorce papers, with a smile. My husband didn't stop her. He filmed it. They called it a gift. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing they'd been planning it for months, erasing me from family photos, silencing my video tribute, changing the menu I'd never ordered. They didn't expect me to stay calm. They definitely didn't expect what I'd already prepared. What would you do if your whole family applauded your humiliation? Because me? I didn't cry. I handed her something of my own, and I watched everything she built. Crack. I arrived 5 minutes early. That's the kind of person I am. Always have been. Charleston was warm that evening, not hot enough to sweat, but warm enough that the linen of my dress clung to the small of my back as I stepped out of the Uber. The restaurant looked like something out of a Southern wedding magazine. Columns, lanterns, white drapery. Nothing about it said me, but everything screamed them. The hostess greeted me politely, with the kind of smile you give someone you don't recognize but assume is important. She didn't say my name, just looked down at her clipboard, made a small check mark, and said, "You're with the Gray Party, right?" I nodded, even though the name didn't feel like it fit anymore. Inside, the setup was grand, elegant even. Long tables covered in soft cream linens, crystal glasses set like museum pieces. Every detail was curated, photos of Seraphine's family over the years framed in silver, a slideshow of Lennox and Delaney playing quietly in the corner. My face didn't appear once. It wasn't an oversight. They don't make mistakes like that. I glanced around for a familiar face. Most of them were familiar in the way framed photos are, looked at often, never really spoken to, and yet they were all there, shaking hands, sipping champagne, congratulating Seraphine on another well-executed evening. It was my birthday, but I already knew whose party it really was. At the head table, I saw the chair I assumed was mine, right in the middle, with a bright, shiny name card in an elegant script. Except when I got closer, it didn't say Brittany. It said Bethany. Bethany. I stood there a little longer than I should have, waiting for someone to correct it, to say, "Oh goodness, that's a mistake." No one did. A server approached and gave me a tight smile. "I think your seat is over here, ma'am," she said, gesturing to a smaller table near the edge of the room. One of those tables you assign to distant relatives or plus ones you hope won't speak much. I followed her without saying a word. Sat down, slipped the Bethany card into my purse. Maybe I'd keep it. Maybe one day I'd need the reminder. Delaney was seated where I should have been. Her name card wasn't smudged, it was engraved. "Oh, that was just a little mix-up," she said brightly when she noticed me at the edge. "Silly mistake, we'll fix it later." But no one moved to fix anything. Dinner came, or rather, was placed. A small plate with grilled vegetables and something that might have once been quinoa. I'd marked steak on my RSVP. I asked the server. He checked his tablet. "It was changed this morning," he said. "Someone updated it on your behalf." Delaney, never one to miss a chance, leaned over and said, "We thought it'd be better for your health goals." I didn't respond. Didn't have to. I smiled. Small, tight, and let the words pass through me like smoke through a screen. I ate what I could. Not because I wanted to, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me react. My mind started drifting, backward. There was the Christmas scarf, the one I never wore because it was wrapped in newspaper, the anniversary bracelet, 2 sizes too big, and the Thanksgiving dinner where everyone went around saying what they were thankful for, and skipped me like I wasn't even seated there. Each time, they said the same thing after. "We love you in our own way." That's what abusers say, just with better lighting and good wine. Later in the evening, I watched Delaney stand in front of the photo backdrop labeled "Happy Birthday, Brittany." She laughed for the camera, posed with a glass of Prosecco, kissed cheeks. Guests lined up to take photos with her, congratulating her, calling her radiant, elegant, a perfect hostess. I stayed seated. My phone buzzed. A text from Clara. "Call me later." Something's off. I didn't answer. Just locked eyes with Seraphine, who was watching me from across the room with a smile that didn't quite make it to her eyes. The kind of smile you give when you think you've won something. And maybe she had, but only for now. I may not have a seat at their table, but I'm done pretending I belong at the foot of it. I needed air. After the polite applause faded and the next course was delayed, I slipped away from the main hall, walking past the champagne table and into the quieter corridor near the restrooms. That's where they'd set it up, what Delaney called the gray legacy wall. The name alone made my teeth clench. Framed portraits lined the black velvet panels, generations of grays, posed like royalty, smiling under flattering lighting. Brass nameplates gleamed beneath each photo like labels in a museum. At first, I looked for something familiar. A photo of Randall and me, maybe. A candid shot from one of the family holidays. Even a blurry wedding image would have sufficed. But the longer I scanned the wall, the more certain I became. My face wasn't there. Then I saw it. The Thanksgiving photo from last year. The one Clara took. I'd been standing directly between Lennox and Seraphine, right in the center. But now, a floral overlay had been conveniently placed, obscuring me entirely. The caption beneath read, "The Heart of Tradition, Seraphine Family." 2 frames down, Lennox and Delaney stood side by side, fresh smiles and a new baby bump visible, beneath a plaque that read, "The Next Generation." Not a single photo of me alone. Not one. I felt my fingers press into the clutch I was holding. The seam dug into my skin, and I welcomed the bite, better than going numb. "They really did crop me out of history," I whispered. A guest walked by, sipping wine. "Such a beautiful legacy, isn't it?" she said to no one in particular. I nodded slowly, but it wasn't agreement. It was survival. You nod, you smile, and you don't cry in public. When I returned to the table, the server had refilled my glass. I picked up my phone to check the time, then noticed a banner notification. Gray Legacy Circle. New message. It was the family group chat. Or, what used to be. They'd renamed it. And no more Gray Family Chat. Now it was Legacy Circle. And my access had changed. I was marked as View Only. I scrolled up. Photos from the party, shared within minutes. Lennox laughing with guests. Delaney posing under the birthday banner. One of Seraphine giving a speech. Not a single image of me, despite me standing right there in most of those frames. No message explaining the change. No note about permissions. Just a quiet reshuffling, subtle, technical, complete. I thought about replying, typing out something sharp, maybe even sarcastic. But instead, I locked the screen and placed the phone face down. I'd spent years watching these shifts happen in small ways. Accidental CC omissions in family emails. Being told plans had changed when, in fact, I'd never been included to begin with. The dinner conversations that paused when I entered a room. The kind of erasure that doesn't need a loud announcement to be effective. Maya Angelou once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." I hadn't. I kept rewriting them in my head, telling myself they didn't mean it, that it was just awkwardness or old-fashioned habits or nerves. But at some point, you have to stop translating cruelty into tradition. Delaney stood by the microphone again, giving another toast, this one about family, perseverance, honoring our roots. The camera flashed. I didn't turn toward it. My phone buzzed again. "Clara, do you see it now?" I stared at the screen. Typed, then deleted. Typed again. "I don't know what I'm seeing anymore," I finally sent. She responded almost instantly. "You're not imagining this. They've been preparing for this moment long before tonight." I looked again at that photo on the wall, the one where my body had been edited out like a smudge on a window. If this was never my place, then why did I try so hard to belong? I didn't have an answer. But I knew I was done chasing a chair at a table where the seating chart had been pre-written. And I was never even penciled in. I didn't go back to the main table right away. Instead, I drifted toward the far end of the room, where they'd arranged a display labeled Gifts for the Birthday Girl. It sat beneath a chandelier, lit like an altar. The glass-topped table shimmered with designer bags, tissue paper blooming like spring flowers. It looked curated, not celebratory. My eyes scanned the boxes, and then I saw it. Ivory paper, burgundy ribbon, the exact wrapping I'd used 2 nights ago. But the card, that wasn't mine. To Delaney, from Randall. I didn't even blink, just stared at it. Randall never wrapped a gift in his life. I'd tied that ribbon with my own hands. I'd written a note and tucked it inside. Something about legacy, motherhood, and the kind of strength Seraphine once told me she admired. I didn't know what felt worse, that it was stolen or that it was reassigned so casually. I turned, slowly. Delaney was chatting with a guest, tossing her hair, laughing like she had nothing in the world to be ashamed of. And maybe she didn't. Maybe shame was for people who still cared about rules. I stepped back toward the table, knelt slightly, and reached behind a stack of silver boxes. My fingers brushed something familiar. Rougher paper, slightly torn. It was the album, the one I'd spent weeks making. Photos I'd dug up, scanned, reprinted, labeled. Moments from their family history. And mine. It had been opened and discarded, the edges bent, a smear of dessert on the cover. The pages inside, handwritten notes in black ink, some were smudged. I could barely read the one I'd written beneath a photo of Randall and his mother from 2006. Something about being grateful for being included. I picked it up, gently, like lifting a pet that had been hit. Seraphine stood across the room, glass in hand, toasting Delaney for being the heart of this family and the future of its legacy. I didn't interrupt. I didn't cry. I wrapped the album in a spare napkin and slipped it back into my purse. During gift opening, Seraphine pulled a silk scarf from a lavender box. The room clapped. She twirled it around her neck and laughed. "Oh, Delaney," she said, "you always know my taste. So elegant." I didn't need to be told. That scarf was mine. I'd found it in a vintage shop near Columbia, hand-stitched, midnight blue with gold thread at the trim. It took me 3 weeks to get it properly cleaned. Delaney caught my eye across the room and gave a little smile. Clara stood in the back, arms crossed. She didn't say a word, just met my eyes and shook her head slightly. I didn't clap. I didn't move. I just thought, this is who they are. Gifts mean something different to me. They're not just things. They're apologies, confessions, bridges. When I can't say what I feel, I give. I always have. A scarf was never just fabric. An album was never just paper. I remembered a quote I kept taped to my mirror for years. Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. Every time I tried to offer something real, they took it, repackaged it, and gave it to someone more acceptable. And every time they did, they made it feel like I didn't belong in my own story. I remembered something my father said once, right after he caught a neighbor stealing our tools from the shed. If it ain't yours, it can't be stolen. But what if what's stolen isn't an object, but the meaning behind it? I walked out to the balcony, the album heavy in my purse. I opened my phone. Deleted the birthday post I'd drafted days ago, something about grateful for family. That wasn't real anymore. Maybe it never was. Instead, I took a photo of the album, not to share, just to remember. Proof that I'd tried, that I showed up with something honest. Clara texted again. "You still there?" I replied, "Only physically." And for the first time in years, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't pain. It was clarity. They didn't just steal my gift. They threw away the part of me that still wanted to belong. The lights dimmed again. That kind of slow fade they do before a speech, meant to hush the room, lift the mood. Someone tapped a fork against glass. It rang out across the dining hall like a church bell, and people turned toward the center table. Randall stood, already holding a microphone. He wasn't looking at me. He looked at the floor first, then off to the side where Seraphine gave him a nod. The kind that says, "Go ahead, don't screw this up." He cleared his throat. "I just want to take a second to thank everyone here tonight for making this such a special evening, especially Mom and Delaney for pulling everything together so beautifully." That didn't surprise me. Then came the part that did. I'm so lucky," he said, smiling like a politician. "Lucky to have someone like Bethany in my life." The room hiccuped. Laughter from 2 or 3 people who thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. He froze, eyes wide. "Sorry, Brittany." "I meant Brittany." The air shifted, not all at once, but just enough. Some guests looked down. A few exchanged glances. Delaney covered her mouth like she was stifling a laugh. Seraphine? She didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, watching me. The corners of her lips curled, not into a smile, but into something close to satisfaction. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't break. I held my wine glass the way you hold onto a railing in high wind, tight, controlled, letting the burn of the stem press into my palm until it grounded me. A man at the next table leaned toward his wife and whispered, "You'd think he'd know his own wife's name." I heard it, loud and clear. Later that night, Seraphine stood to give a speech of her own. Of course she did. Her voice carried with ease, like she'd been rehearsing all week. She opened with a story about tradition, about how family was not just about shared blood, but shared values. She thanked Lennox for keeping the family name strong. She thanked Delaney for bringing elegance and grace into our home. She thanked the caterer, the florist, even the parking valet. She didn't mention me. Not once. I waited. A pause, a breath, a look in my direction. Maybe? Nothing. Clara didn't clap. That's how I knew I wasn't imagining it. The rest of the room applauded anyway. Back at the table, I sat still as the chatter picked up again. Forks clinked. Plates were cleared. I stood quietly and made my way to the restroom, locking the door behind me. In the mirror, I looked perfect. Foundation smooth, eyeliner sharp, lipstick intact. I looked like a woman who had everything under control. But my eyes? They told the truth. My therapist once told me, "You're not overreacting. You're just finally seeing clearly." I stared at my reflection and tried to see myself the way they saw me. Temporary. Replaceable. Decorative. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Back at the table, the server leaned down beside me and asked gently, "Ma'am, are you finished with your plate?" I hadn't even touched it. I shook my head and said, "Not hungry." Clara appeared beside me not long after, her steps quiet, like she knew noise would be too much. She handed me a napkin, folded, delicately shaped like a crane. I looked at her. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. When I was a child, I used to fold cranes when I was nervous, during storms, after bad report cards, when I couldn't find the words to say what I needed to say. Clara remembered that. "They're making a mistake they can't take back," she said softly. I nodded. I don't think they ever saw me as someone they'd have to apologize to. She didn't argue. She just stayed. And I wasn't sure what hurt more, being invisible or being erased so carefully it looked like love. When I got back to the table, they had already cleared my plate. No one asked where I'd gone. No one looked up. It was as if I'd evaporated and re-solidified in the same chair, and it wouldn't have changed a single beat of the music playing overhead. There was a white envelope tucked under the edge of my charger plate. It was elegant, handwritten, ivory paper with gold trim, sealed with wax. I recognized Seraphine's handwriting instantly. It always looked like it came from a place that never touched dishwater or handled disappointment. To my daughter-in-law, with love, Seraphine. My fingers hesitated before opening it. I already knew what it was. Not the content, but the tone. The packaging was always more honest than the message inside. I unfolded the card, a single line, centered, in smooth cursive. "You deserve better. Love, dear." That word, she'd never used it with me before. Not once. And here it was, finally spoken, as if it were a favor. As if it were a parting gift dressed up in polite betrayal. I set the card down gently and noticed another item beside it. A gift-wrapped rectangle. Clara, who had returned to the table without a word, leaned closer. Her brow furrowed. "What's that?" she whispered. I already knew. I peeled back the wrapping carefully, and there it was, plain as daylight. How to rebuild yourself after a failed marriage. I heard a soft gasp from Clara. I waved her off before she could speak. "Let them finish their show," I whispered. "We're just background noise now." I slid the book into my purse, smiled politely at no one in particular, and folded the envelope with precision. I could have made a scene. I could have stood up and asked loudly, Do you give this to all the women you push out of the family? But I didn't. Not because I was weak, but because I knew they needed my silence to keep playing innocent. Across the table, Seraphine gave a nod, small, smug, satisfied, like a director signaling cut. Delaney leaned in, voice syrupy. She really put a lot of thought into that one. I nodded. She always does. And then, without warning, my mind jumped back. The first dinner at their house, 7 years ago. I had worn a blouse I couldn't afford and memorized wine pairings from a blog post. I thought if I said something insightful, something clever, maybe she'd see me differently. I told her Merlot worked better with lamb than most people gave it credit for. She tilted her head, smiled slightly, and said, "That's sweet, dear." That tone, same word, dipped in condescension. It hadn't changed. I had. All the meals cooked, the birthdays remembered, the gifts mailed in perfect wrapping. None of it had ever earned me a place. Not really. Because I wasn't supposed to exist in their version of this family. I was tolerated, never welcomed. Clara stood quietly and motioned for me to step away. We found a hallway outside the banquet room, quiet, dimly lit, smelling faintly of citrus cleaner and old wood. "You need to say something," she said. "They're not listening," I replied. "They don't need to," she shot back. "You do. You need to hear yourself say it." I looked down. She pressed something into my hand, a folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was the resume we had worked on together months ago. When I thought maybe I could start again, build something that wasn't built around the gray name. "You told me you were done shrinking to fit them," Clara said. "So act like it now." Back inside, the music had shifted again. Laughter. More toasts. I didn't sit back down. Instead, I stepped outside. The air was cool, the breeze off the river carrying something that felt like possibility. Or maybe it was just silence without performance. I sat on a bench not far from the valet loop. Through the tall windows, I could see them still moving inside, laughing, sipping, and celebrating themselves. I took the book out of my purse, opened to the first page, then tore it out. No noise, just the firm rip of finality. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. "We'd like to schedule an interview," the subject line read. I didn't smile, not yet, but my back straightened, my jaw set. I looked through the glass at the woman still wearing my scarf. This party wasn't where I end. They wanted to wrap me up in goodbyes, but they didn't know I'd already given mine, to the version of me who needed them to stay whole. I sat back down like nothing had changed, but everything had. The room was buzzing again. Small talk layered over silverware tapping porcelain, laughter too loud, toasts too rehearsed. Seraphine leaned into Randall with the grace of someone who knew all eyes were on her, and Randall, well, he barely looked in my direction. I picked up my phone just to have something to look at. That's when I saw it. A notification. "Your application has been withdrawn." My chest tightened. I tapped the email, not even sure which job it was anymore. I'd applied to so many. Just quietly, on the side, hoping something would lead me out of this mess. This one was from a design firm I'd actually been excited about. The message was short. "Thank you for your interest, but after reviewing conflicting personal character references, we're unable to proceed." Conflicting character references. No one outside this table knew I'd applied. My resume hadn't left this state. A wave moved through me. Not cold, not hot, just solid, like cement settling in my gut. Clara's words from weeks ago rang in my head. Always check where rejection emails come from. Sometimes they slip up. I pulled the message into the full view and checked the sender details. White Legacy, consulting at Proton Mail. Proton Mail. I had never given that email to anyone, but I knew who would create a name like that. Seraphine. She didn't want me to leave. She wanted to push me out, then lock the door behind me, and leave a note on the window saying I'd chosen to walk away. I sat still. Rage didn't explode. It simmered, then boiled. I forwarded the email to myself, screenshotted it, saved it to my encrypted folder, labeled it Legacy Proof, V1. Someone behind me made a comment about the wine. I didn't hear it. My ears were full of static. I lifted my glass and took a sip, not because I needed a drink, because I needed a delay. Randall walked over a few minutes later. Not to ask if I was okay. He didn't sit, just stood near the end of the table with his phone angled toward me like he was scrolling. But the screen reflection in the wine glass showed something else. He was recording me. I looked straight into the lens. Didn't flinch. Then I smiled. A slow, even smile, like I'd been waiting for that exact moment. Inside, I wanted to scream. They think they're capturing my breakdown. But they were recording something else entirely. The moment I stopped pretending they held the script, I reached into my purse and touched the bent metal tag. Guest of honor. It didn't sting anymore. It felt like evidence. I typed a message to Clara. I need the old contract, the restaurant one. You still have it? She replied in under 10 seconds. Yes, scanned and ready. Good, I wrote back. They're about to learn legacy cuts both ways. I stood up, not dramatically, just calmly, the way someone stands when they're done asking for space. I'll be right back, I said to no one. Out in the garden area, the air was cooler, cleaner. The string lights hanging above the hedges buzzed faintly. For a moment, I thought about walking home barefoot, but I wasn't done yet. I pulled out my phone again, opened my drafts, found the email to the second company I had applied to, a backup plan just in case. Thank God I had one. I wrote a new message. Brief, clear. Apologies for any confusion. Attached is my updated resume. Please let me know if you'd still like to speak. Attach the file. Hit send. Then I opened my folder labeled Exit Plan. It wasn't a dramatic name. I'd made it months ago when I first realized I needed a way out. Inside were copies of everything: emails, texts, screenshots. I added the new evidence, labeled it Gray Family Playbook. Then I stood there for a long moment, not because I didn't know what to do next, but because, for the first time in a very long time, I knew exactly what came after this. They wanted a reaction. Instead, I started a record. The MC's voice cut through the dinner chatter like a spoon against glass. We have something special prepared now, a tribute video to celebrate all Brittany has brought to this family. I didn't move. Clara turned her head slightly toward me, her expression unreadable. She had helped me compile that video. We'd spent hours sorting old photos, digitizing childhood pictures, adding clips of my design work. My first gallery showing, the award I won for that school renovation project. We had uploaded it together, double-checked the audio, everything. The lights dimmed. The projector came to life. Then, static. The slideshow that followed wasn't the video we made. It was a mix of family vacation photos, Florida beach trips, ski lodges, baby showers, mostly of Lennox and Delaney, Seraphine hugging various guests, Randall holding Delaney's niece, smiling wide. I wasn't in a single frame. Not one. No clips of me, no audio, not even a slide with my name. The screen flickered. The lights came back on. The MC shrugged, smiled. Technical error, he said, too casually. Let's move along. No one seemed to mind. No one questioned it. Not even Randall. I stood slowly and made my way toward the restroom, slipping through the crowd like fog. In the hallway, I took a deep breath, then another, and pushed open the door. Inside, a young server was washing her hands. She looked up at me and smiled politely. You the one covering table 3? My dress was neutral, yes, simple, clean, professional. I looked her in the eye and said, No, but thank you for the reminder. She blinked, confused, then nodded and left. That was the moment it hit me. This party wasn't built for me. It was built to present an image of who they wished I'd been. Someone quieter, someone easier to mold, someone who wouldn't notice when the camera panned away. I looked at myself in the mirror, straight shoulders, lips tight. I didn't look broken, just done. Back at the table, I didn't sit. I scanned the room. Who was laughing too loudly? Who avoided my eyes? Who leaned in too close when Seraphine spoke? Everything was calculation, and I had spent too many years mistaking it for kindness. Clara caught my eye again from across the room. This time, she nodded. I texted her. Keep that flash drive. They erased me in public. I'm going to respond in public too. She responded instantly with a thumbs up emoji. She knew what I meant. I wasn't going to play their game anymore. But I wasn't walking away either, not yet. Randall stood in the corner, speaking to his father. His hands were moving too much, avoiding my eyes again. Typical. I thought about it for a second, about walking over there, dropping the folder of evidence onto the table and saying, "Try spinning this in your next PR release." But not now. Not yet. I slid the folder back into my purse, next to the resume, next to the contract Clara had scanned. A quote I'd once scribbled in a notebook came to mind. Power is knowing you can destroy, but choosing when. I took a sip of wine and smiled. Not for them. For me. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and the buzz softened, Seraphine approached with a man from the local historic society. "Have you met Randall's wife?" she said. "She works in hospitality." There it was again, polite erasure. I extended my hand and said, "Actually, I co-designed the layout of this venue, but I'm sure that got lost in translation." The man looked genuinely impressed. Seraphine's mouth twitched. Just a little. I didn't give her time to recover. I walked away, not in a rush, but with finality. Out onto the balcony, I leaned against the railing and watched the lights dance on the river. "That's the last time you introduce me," I said out loud. Not to her, to myself. They mistook my silence for surrender, but I had just stopped speaking their language. The room fell quiet again. Not out of respect, but because the MC was back on the mic, smiling like he had another trick up his sleeve. "And now," he said, "a final surprise. Something from the family, to our birthday girl." There was a shift, barely noticeable if you weren't paying attention. Randall didn't look at me. Delaney straightened her dress and folded her hands just so. Clara tilted her chin, suspicious. Then Seraphine stood. She moved slowly, like a queen at a coronation. In her hands, a large ivory envelope, sealed in gold. She held it like it contained a family heirloom. My heart slowed. She stepped to the front and smiled, as if what was about to happen was a gift. "From all of us," she said, "we want you to feel empowered in your next chapter." She extended the envelope toward me, arms stiff with politeness. I took it. The paper was thick, the kind you'd use for wedding invitations. I peeled it open, aware of every eye in the room. Inside, divorce papers, signed, dated. My name, spelled correctly, for the first time all night. The crowd didn't gasp. They didn't know if it was real or a twisted performance. Some chuckled nervously. Most looked away. Randall stared at the floor. I didn't flinch. I folded the papers neatly and placed them beside my wine glass. That was their finale. Seraphine stepped in closer, her voice dropping just low enough that only I could hear. "We never truly saw you here," she said. "This was just our way of returning the silence." The cruelty wasn't in the words. It was in the precision. She didn't hate me. She simply never considered me necessary. My mind flashed to our first family dinner. Me, anxious, practicing napkin folds at home, wanting to impress, to belong. And now, this. Clara didn't move. Her eyes met mine across the room, burning with restrained fury. I stood up, not because I was told to, but because I had waited long enough. I walked to the microphone. "Since we're exchanging documents tonight," I said, "I have something too." I pulled another envelope from my purse, clean, sharp edges. Inside, the email, the metadata, the IP trace. The person who submitted false references to my prospective employer used a fabricated consultancy email. It was traced to a private server registered under the name Seraphine Gray. A ripple moved across the room. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my hand. I laid both envelopes down on the table. "Legacy built on erasure is nothing but performance," I said, "and I won't be part of your theater anymore." I didn't wait for a reaction. There was none. No applause, no outrage, just quiet, heavy and full. I turned, walked through the center of the room, the same way I came in, my heels steady, my spine straight. Guests moved aside. Some wouldn't meet my eyes. Others watched like they'd just witnessed a sermon they hadn't been ready for. At the exit table, I paused, pulled out the bent name tag from my purse, the one that read, Guest of Honor. I placed it carefully on the guest book, not to be remembered, but to be documented. Clara joined me in the parking lot. She didn't speak, just handed me a folded set of documents, copies of the original LLC contract for the restaurant's interior design. My name, clear as day, next to Seraphine's. They forgot I was part of the foundation, I said. She smiled. You were more than that. But they signed over that mistake years ago, I added. Not angry, just done. They built the table to dismiss me, but I brought the contract that owned the room. The morning sun cut through the blinds like it had a job to do. I sat up slowly in Clara's guest room, the same way you stand after kneeling too long. The air smelled like lavender and old hardwood. No hangover, no tears, just quiet. The kind of quiet you get when the noise finally dies and you realize you're still standing. Clara came in with coffee. No words, just the warmth of the mug pressed into my palm. She placed something on the table beside me. It was the name tag, the one that read Guest of Honor. Bent from my fingers, I looked at it and whispered, I kept waiting to earn that title. Now I know I never needed it. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That afternoon, the local news ran a short segment. Gray Family Gala ends in silence. Seraphine's name wasn't in the headline, but it didn't have to be. There were murmurs of board removals, a community panel seat left vacant. Clara had sent the email evidence, not to the press, but to a nonprofit watchdog that specialized in quiet accountability. I never gave a statement, didn't tweet a word. The silence from Randall was louder than any press release. Not a call, not even a lazy text. For once, I didn't crave it. The silence felt clean. I started writing a letter to Seraphine, not to plead, just to say what had never been said. I wrote about the time I burned a roast trying to replicate her Easter lamb recipe. How I stayed up 2 nights sewing the neckline of her gown before a gala she never thanked me for. How I thought, for a long time, that earning her respect was the same as earning love. But I stopped writing halfway through and tore the letter into strips. Let the pieces fall from Clara's 3rd-story balcony. Not forgiveness, just sovereignty. 2 weeks later, I signed the lease on a small studio space in Asheville. It wasn't fancy. Chipped paint, leaky pipes, but the light. The light didn't apologize for taking up space. I hung my vision boards on the wall, pinned photos from old projects they used to say weren't worth framing. A friend from college connected me with the owner of a local cafe looking to redesign her space. I met her on a Tuesday, sketched while we talked. She liked what she saw. You got a business name yet? She asked. I smiled. Just Brittany. One morning, Clara came by the studio. She carried a frame, wrapped in brown paper. Inside was the screenshot of the job offer email I'd received the night of the party. Below it, she'd written in blue pen, "This is where it begins, not where you were erased." We stood there, holding our coffee in mismatched mugs. I laughed, then cried, a little, then laughed again. I opened the drawer of my fire-safe box. Inside was a copy of the divorce papers. Still folded, still clean. I didn't burn them, didn't shred them, just filed them. Not as a wound, as history. Sometimes survival isn't loud, it's just refusing to disappear. And in the quiet of my own name, I finally heard the sound of beginning.